Elize McKelvey is a supremely talented artist who took the unusual path of joining the United States Marine Corps after graduating from art school. Serving in graphics, she began deploying as a combat artist until she transitioned back into the civilian world in 2020, where she works today as a freelance illustrator while still working closely with her friends in the Combat Arts program. Let's give a warm Patriot Arts welcome for today's guest, Elize McKelvey. All right, and welcome to the show, Elize. We're so glad that you could join us.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. This is going to be great. Tell us a little bit about you and who you are, and then before we get totally into the military side and your veteran side and your art side, just a little bit general knowledge on you.
Who I am as an individual. That is quite a story for everyone, I would assume. Well, for me, I grew up in Ohio. That's where I was born, in like Amish country, you could say. So it was a pretty rural upbringing. I actually grew up in a pretty artistic family. My grandpa was an artist during the Korean War, and oddly enough, had no influence on me becoming a military artist later in life. I didn't really even know that until after I joined, but I did know he was an artist. And both my mom and my aunts were artists. My brother was artsy. So it was always part of my upbringing. I always like to say growing up, we were given white paper instead of coloring books. If we wanted to color, we had to draw what we wanted to draw first. So that was kind of like my childhood. But I was also pretty involved in a lot of sports. I was in band, all that kind of stuff. And I was extremely shy growing up. And about in high school, I figured that if I was going to be an artist after high school, I needed to figure out a way to break out of my shell a little bit. So I decided to teach myself how to break dance in the cornfields of Ohio. And I joined my high school talent show my senior year. And that was like how I got on stage and I guess essentially tried to start breaking out of my shell a little bit. And ironically, that flowed into going to art school in Boston, the Art Institute of Boston, and I was on the dance team there for breakdancing, and I also ran college cross country while attending art school, which was unique in a sense because normally when you go to art school, you go to art school. You're not doing sports or anything like that. So that was a really fun situation for me. And I think that sort of foreshadows into how I decided to join the military after art school, because for some reason, I guess I like to do things a little bit differently. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I ended up going to art school. I always assumed I was going to be an artist ever since probably about 10 years old. And I didn't know I was going to join the military until my junior year of art school, when I came across a art history class specifically for illustration, and for about 10 minutes they talked about something called combat art. And I had to step back for a second and I was like, what the heck is combat art? Because you don't generally hear art in the military together. That's a very strange oxymoron, if you will. And so I went home after that class and I started researching a little bit on what combat art was, and lo and behold, it's a huge part of history and documenting history, because you have to think, before photography and videography, they had artists go to the front lines and depict what was going on. And even though we have more technology today, it's still something that is utilized as a means to help sharing stories with the civilian population. So over the course of those last 2 years before I graduated, I did a little bit of research and decided that, again, I'm just going to do things a little differently and join the Marine Corps out of all the branches, with the understanding that I was going to be a Marine first and an artist second. being an artist in the Marine Corps wasn't a primary job. My main job was graphic arts, print production, stuff like that, social media managing a little bit. But over the years, I got to know the combat art program and they got to know me. And eventually, I started doing deployments under that program. And then I got out in October of 2020. And now I'm a full-time artist, still involved with the art program for the Marine Corps, but also primarily just doing a lot of freelance illustration and stuff like that.
Hello veterans, I'm Mary White, and one of the best things about watercolor is that you can paint in watercolor almost anywhere. You can paint in your kitchen too. You can set your stuff out right on the counter, on the kitchen table, and the good thing is if you get watercolor on the surface, it won't hurt, it'll just wipe right up again. But sometimes artists tell me that their place where they work just doesn't have enough light. So let me make a suggestion to you, and that is to get this portable light. It's called Lume Cube. And no, I'm not a spokesperson. I just love this. I use this myself. This is a wonderful little portable light that you can control the amount of light and the temperature of light with this. It's the size of a cell phone. So go online, look it up. It's called Lume Cube. Get yourself one and you can paint anywhere with this.
And that's really the whole, that's our motto at the Patriot Art Foundation, helping veterans tell their stories through the arts. And it's, everybody's got stories, and veterans have incredible stories, you know, and sometimes they need to share that, but sometimes words fail. And that's when art comes in. Art is just primal. It's very primal.
Yeah.
And it can speak in ways that, there's just this mouth right here is never going to pull it off. I could try to write it. The visual arts are powerful in that way, and so that's really, I'm so glad that you literally said our motto, and I just love it.
There we go. You didn't have to pay me for that.
But speaking of art, though, let's go ahead and show some of your art off, because we've got some digital art, we've got some pastel art, we've got some colored pencil art, and we've got just some sketchbook art, which is just fabulous. Let's go ahead and start with this sketchbook, because you were talking about telling veteran stories. So here's one right here. Talk to me about this one. Look at that. It just touches my heart right there.
This drawing here was created after I did a quick sketchbook drawing. This was done actually on one of my first missions as a civilian combat artist, where I had the opportunity to document the refugees coming in from Afghanistan into the US. And this was a scene of just a Marine helping a child out. They were scared. They'd been on this bus for days without much of anything, barely speaking English, not really knowing what's going on. Everything was happening so fast. And then they get these Marines that are just trying their best to welcome them into this refugee camp and kind of get them all situated. And a lot of the Marines were out there playing with these kids, playing soccer or whatever. And it was really like a touching thing to see. So this was actually drawn in silver and gold wire in a technique called metal point.
Oh, I love metal point.
Yeah.
Yes. Fantastic. So talk to us a little bit. What is metal point? Describe it exactly. Because
metal point
is a little different.
Yes, it is very different. It's again a technique I stumbled upon because I'm always going back and researching academic works and processes. It's fascinating to me, and I'm sure the older I get, the more refined in that style that I will become, but I'm still very new to it. Metal point was a technique used before the discovery of graphite. And before anybody listening says, well, graphite's metal, graphite is not a metal, graphite's a carbon. It's a little bit different. A big difference between graphite and metal point is metal point, it doesn't smudge. You can't erase it. Your paper has to be prepped a little bit. And I can guarantee you a lot of artists like Leonardo, Michelangelo, all these guys, you've actually seen metal point work that you thought was graphite, but it was done in metal, primarily in like the 1400s. And then it made a resurgence in the 1900s. And, you'll find artists doing it today. It's just a smaller niche style.
It is definitely a smaller niche. I picked it up. A friend of mine named Gavin he actually makes his own styluses out of sterling silver and copper.
I need to get one from him.
Like that. He's pretty amazing. And, I picked up metal point, and I just fell in love with it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely different. You got to put the ground on the paper because
Yeah.
it won't stick. So basically, you're sanding off the little bits of metal. But I love it. And
Yeah.
you had mentioned during the Renaissance artists, a lot of people see their artwork, and it does look like it's got a sepia tone to it, and that's because it's rusted, it's corroded,
Yeah, it
it's
oxidizes. Yeah.
oxidization. So if you use copper or
Yep.
any soft metal, you can do it with aluminum, any soft metal, but it oxidizes.
That's
and
why
it
a lot of
changes
artwork,
over time.
you'll look at older artwork and it has like a green tint to it. It's
Yep.
because it probably oxidized. They probably used copper or something.
Yep. Yeah.
And it turned
Usually
green.
copper and silver. Yeah. So it's pretty wild. So that's fantastic. So you said it's something new that you've been using?
Yeah. Well, over the course of the last like year and a half or so, or 2 years, I think I became the first artist in the Marine Corps combat art collection to donate metal point works. I have 2 pieces in their collection that are done in metal point.
Oh, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. That is great. I love it. Well, speaking of that, now let's go to some more dry media here. Talk to us about this one. This is a beautiful portrait.
This is pastels, colored pencils, and charcoal. It was a charcoal base, and then I sprayed a workable fixative, and went over it with pastels and colored pencil. And this was totally an experimental phase that came around, and I loved it so much, and I've been really trying to refine that process over the last few years. And it's just been a lot of fun. These are really cool because if you hold them to the light, you can see that original charcoal underdrawing. So much so that I ended up doing a drawing later on where I drew a charcoal skull and then colored over it my portrait. And so the only way to see the skull is to put the portrait drawing up to the light, and it'll like shine through.
Nice.
But it's such pastels are so translucent, so are colored pencils, that the light will just shine right through it. But
right, so it's almost like you're doing an oil glazing technique over.
Yes, yeah, and I do a lot of layering. I'm sure that's why metal point works so well for me, is because for metal point you have to layer in the metal. You can't just press hard for a dark line, and that fits really well for my style. Because even with like acrylics, for instance, I do almost like a glazing technique. I'm not very heavy-handed with much of my mediums.
Now, do you use primarily when you paint? Do you use acrylics, or have you ever worked with oils? Or
I've used acrylics and gouache. I would love to use oils. The only time I used oils is briefly in like art school. But I am a nomad. So when I left the Marine Corps, I converted my SUV into a traveling art studio and home, basically like a micro camper. And it's hard. Oils are, take a little while to dry, and I don't have a lot of space. So I haven't really dabbled too much with oils, but I'm sure I will in the next 10 years. But right now I mainly do acrylics.
Oh, fantastic. No, I feel your pain there. That's why when I plein air paint, I use gouache or acrylic, because I can close my little art book and leave without making a giant mess tearing it out. So this is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful portrait. I absolutely love the angle, the eyes, the facial expression. It's just fantastic. And I do love that you can see all the layers as you go through. That transparency to all the colors and stuff is just fantastic.
There's a really refined like cross hatching too, because I really wanted to like pay homage to the academic style, and so when I brought in the colored pencils, it's like a hatching technique that it really only comes through when you see them in person, but maybe you can see a little bit in the reproduction.
Yeah, I can definitely see a little bit of it. Of course, I got to see it very large on my screen.
Yeah.
Our viewers have that thing. Hopefully, I may end up, in the editing process, we'll maybe see if we can zoom in a little bit on
there's
that.
5 portraits. This was the first one, and then I did 4 more after that as I was learning the process. This was the original.
So let's go to another portrait that you've done. Look at this one. This one is fun. I don't care who you are. This is a good one. I like that hair. I used to have hair, and that's some hair right there. Talk to us about this fellow right here.
Yeah, this one came after all those experimental portraits got out of the way, and then I had a client reach out asking me to do a memorial portrait for their dad, and they really wanted me to capture his funky essence. And she sent me a few photos, and they were pretty low resolution. Some of them weren't even in color. But I have this style, I guess, that I've been working on where I paint with my gut in terms of color. And so I can take a grayscale portrait and like make it color essentially. And that's how this came around. And I was able to utilize the practice that I'd been doing with pastels and colored pencils and created this piece for that client for their family, and they loved it. And it was really fun to do as well.
Yeah, he's got like a mischievous Santa Claus.
Yeah, I love it.
Just
I got to hand deliver that too, which is pretty rare. Usually I have to mail them out, but I was passing through the area and actually got to like give it to them, which was cool.
Oh yeah, and how was their reaction?
They loved it. Yeah, they really liked it. And I'm just happy they
that's
liked
the thing. As a portrait artist, people sometimes get sticker shock when they see a portrait price, and they're like, and I'm like, you paid more for your kid's senior portrait when you graduated high school, and then 100%. I'm like, like I've told people before, it's like you get your wedding, like I've got a beautiful photo from my wedding to Mrs. Gagno, and it's on my wall. I guarantee you it's not going to be hanging up in my kid's house. It's exactly. They're not gonna, what are they going to do? When I'm gone, it's gone. It's going to be in a box in one of my kids' attics somewhere,
Yep.
And so, but I also have portraits of Mrs. Gagno, and I know that my great grandkids are probably going to be fighting over those portraits because there's something about a painting, a drawing, that it becomes a family heirloom. It becomes something very precious because there's something about, it's the difference between, and mind you, photography is an amazing art form, but there's just something about a painted portrait, a drawn portrait. There's something different about it. And it's almost an intangible thing that makes it so unique. Speaking of that, let's go to this next one. Oh, I like this one. Because when I was there was a thing called the Gagno Original. And so I was always doing caricatures of retiring bigwigs. And people would come up to me and they would say, Airman Gagno, Colonel so-and-so is retiring. And we would like you to help us humiliate him visually with art. And they would give me decades of dirt on this poor soul. And then I would draw this super humiliating portrait of them, and they would frame it and they would give it to that person at their retirement.
Thank you for your service here.
Yes, thank you for your service. Well, here, you can hang this in your house and be embarrassed for the rest of your life by it. So, but this one is not like that. Yours is, I'm sure the person that received this was super honored, and this is hanging up with pride. So let me show this one off. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so I will say I definitely did a lot of those caricatures as well, though I tried my best to make them look awesome. But they were still silly going away gifts that I ended up doing. Now this, though, was my last duty station in the Marine Corps, was at the Pentagon, and I served right under the Commandant of the Marine Corps, which is the highest ranking officer. And there became a point, every commandant gets their portrait painted, and it hangs in both the halls of the Pentagon and the home of the commandants, which is one of the oldest buildings in Washington, D.C. But at this point, the funding had been cut for all portrait paintings. They used to hire like an oil painter to come in and paint the portrait. They cut that funding. I was like, well, I'm here. I'm in the Marine Corps already, and I can do digital, which means there's no supplies cost, and you're already paying me as a Marine, so just let me do it. And somehow the commandant came down, who's this portrait painting of, and he's like, all right, if you think you can do it, do it. And so I became from what I understand, the first active duty Marine to paint the commandant's portrait. And that's what this is. So it's a digital portrait painting that I mimicked the style of oils so that when they did end up hanging it in the Pentagon and the home of the commandants, it was able to hang seamlessly with these oil painting collections. And that was really cool. So
that is a fantastic story. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. Opportunities like this don't come up very often because you're right. It's like anything else. The first thing they slash on the budget is the art, sadly. And this, you were able to work around that in a beautiful way and make a stunning stunning portrait. And this is a proof of that beautiful digital art, how it can mimic the traditional art forms. So did you pose for you, or did you do this from a photo?
Yeah, so he came down to our office and we had a little studio. General Nellers is his name. He was an individual where he had a lot going on. There's a lot of things going on in the Marine Corps at that time that, he was a busy man. But he was always like, okay, I would go into his office and he'd be like, you have 3 minutes to pitch whatever you need to pitch me, go. And so there was never a moment where you had like an extended amount of time with him. But he did come down to our studio. We were able to snap some photos of him. And then that's what I based the painting off of. And if you look into the portrait collection of every commandant, usually there's some like hidden meeting, like some commandants will have their wife's portrait in the background or something like that. He didn't want any of that. He wanted it as simple as possible. It was really hard to get any opinion out of him, and he never smiled. He wasn't a smiler. He was kind of an angry personality. But I will say, toward the end, when he finally retired, they snapped a photo of the unveiling of this portrait painting, and I have it, and he's smiling as he's looking at that. And I think a little bit of him probably maybe regretted not taking more time to talk with me about what he wanted. He maybe, looking back, would have implemented a little more personality into it, but it's still a great portrait and he loves it and appreciated it, and now that's on the walls forever, so I sure hope he likes it.
Well, it's a beautiful portrait. It's fantastically done. It's really his personality of a no-nonsense Marine lifer is coming through. And that's, I know a lot of guys like that. I'm thinking of one right now, as a matter of fact. And, but it's so well done. And what an honor to have that hanging up in there.
It's really cool.
Eternity,
in the Pentagon. And I will say also, like the commandant after him just retired last month, and a fellow combat artist who was on the officer side. So I was like the enlisted representative, and Captain C.J. Bauman was like the officer representative for our program. He got the opportunity to follow in what I did and was able to paint this last commandant's portrait digitally as well. And they just unveiled that. So it's cool to see that sort of like tradition starting.
Tradition. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. What a powerful story. It's like you started a brand new tradition because the budget got cut. And you found a way. And you made it happen. And it's like, we don't have to let traditions go. We just got to get creative.
You just got to change it a little. Just shift it around. All they were going to do was print his photo. Like that was what was the plan before we came in the digital art idea. So.
Right. Yeah. And digital art is such a fascinating new tool for us artists to use. And it's so cool that you were able to do it, because now you can have one over here and one over here very easy. You don't have to paint two paintings. You have,
it's awesome.
They look exactly the same.
And I will say, like, being able to do that is only because I was also learning traditional techniques. I think that's really just made my digital art so much better and so much more like painterly, is because I'm able to switch between the two.
Fantastic. Well, talk to me a little bit before we go. Where are you headed towards in the future here? What's the future hold for you in your art career?
I've never really been able to predict what opportunities have popped up, because I've had so many crazy experiences that I'm like, how do you plan for that? Recently, I did some portrait paintings for the Smithsonian for a series that they do, and I got to also paint in Norman Rockwell's studio for a series that they did in his actual studio, and that was crazy. I would have never predicted that. So it's just, I don't know what's going to happen next, but all I do know is that I'm going to be drawing every single day, and opportunities will come as they come. I am traveling full time in my SUV, like I mentioned earlier, with the intentions of painting and drawing as I go, to create some sort of art journal book at the end of it, of my travels. But who knows what is in store for me. I'm also pretty active still. I ran on the All Marine running team while I was in for a small stint, so still run from back in my college days, and I'm teaching myself how to mountain bike right now because I want to run what's called an Xterra, which is like an off-road triathlon. So I'm not always drawing. I'm also doing other things. I hike all the time. I have a kayak coming this week, so I'll probably be
You got
painting
a
from my
kayak.
boat.
There you go.
Yep, I'm
That's
gonna do some
fantastic.
boat painting. The goal is to be like the extreme artist of Red Bull.
There you go, Red
Not
Bull. Well, I can
sponsored.
tell you, plein air painting in a kayak is wicked awesome fun. I can tell you
Yeah.
because I've done it and it's a blast. We
Yeah.
go kayaking all the time here in Florida and in the springs and in the Gulf of Mexico, and it is
Yeah.
sweet.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
kayaking. I've just never had my own kayak. And this kayak I'm getting breaks down into like different parts so I can store it inside of my SUV, which is really cool. So we'll see what happens in the next year. I do a lot of like portrait commission work, and right now I'm doing some animation commission work. So I'm all over the place and I love it.
Oh, fantastic. That is so great. Well, Elize, it was fabulous talking to you. I
Yeah.
know that this is going to be one of the best shows ever.
Oh
And
man.
so we will definitely have to have you back on to hear
Yeah.
some more of your adventures and some more of your artwork to show. But I know that our Patriots are just going to absolutely love you. And I want to say thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you. And everyone, if you have any questions, definitely shoot them and I'll try and answer them for you.
Yeah, so we're going to have your website on the bottom of the screen. It's probably on there already. Nothing like post-production. And it will be right there. And it'll also be in the description in all of the social media posts that we do.
Awesome.
So,
love it.
Thank you very much, Elize.
Thank you.
All right.
Welcome, veterans, to Watercolor Boot Camp, where we are going to show you how you can tell your own story through art. I'm Mary White. I spent 7 years traveling the country, painting veterans from all walks of life and from every state for the project We the People, Portraits of Veterans in America. And that's where I learned how painting can be a way for you too, as a veteran, to tell your own story. We're going to show you how you can select your painting materials, draw it on the paper, mix the color, paint washes, and create paintings that you'll be proud enough to show your family.
I was a combat medic.
Army.
I hadn't painted in 55 years.
Since the 4th grade?
I tried watercoloring once, it didn't work out very well. Not as hard as I thought it was.
And so what will your paintings look like? Well, they won't look like mine, and they won't look like anybody else's, because there's no one way to paint. There's not a right way or a wrong way. Your paintings will look just like your own, because maybe you like to paint every little detail, or maybe you like to paint big, loose washes and paintings that are almost abstract. You might like bright, vibrant color, or you may prefer neutral colors.
I'm learning and watching Mary, how she just throws paint on the canvas and all of a sudden it's a pair of boots. Amazing.
It sounds weird, but you lose track of time. And that's when you know you're doing something that's good for you. You'll be painting and all of a sudden you look around and it's like, man, it's been 2 hours. Oh, this is amazing. This is what I've been doing with my life, painting.
We're going to come alongside you so that you can work at your own pace in your own home. And we're going to show you how to paint big, loose paintings, still life, landscapes, flowers, animals, portraits, and even illustrated journals that you'll be proud to have as a keepsake.
It saved me. I hit a really deep spot, and it was the art therapy that it pulled me out. I get stressed, that's the first thing I go to. The problem still exists, but it doesn't affect me anymore.
We are so proud at the Patriot Art Foundation to partner with Terracotta to bring you these courses. And so now, let's get started.